Welcome to MSL Talk with Tom Caravela, a podcast specifically designed for MSLs and all things field medical. Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. My guest today is Chris Caston. He's Senior Director of Talent Acquisition at Encarta Therapeutics. And we talk about how HR departments determine compensation and job titles for job offers. So this is an awesome conversation. You get a lot of questions on this. Hope you guys enjoy it. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Instagram, and connect with me on LinkedIn if you haven't already. Would love to connect with you all. And check us out on MSL Talk Live, which is the first Tuesday of every month at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. And that's on the Clubhouse app. Hope to see you there. Hey, Chris, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining me, buddy.
Yeah, no problem, Tom. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, this is a treat for me because for those listening, Chris, I've known for probably 17 years. So we go back a long way, and it's great when your clients become your friends and you keep in touch and you get to know people. So that would be Chris. He's awesome. You guys are going to love this. So let's start with an introduction. Why don't you introduce yourself and where you're from and all that good stuff?
Sure. So I'm Chris Caston. I'm a Senior Director and Head of Total Rewards for Senior Director of Talent Acquisition at Encarta Therapeutics. Companies based in South San Francisco, California. I personally am located in San Diego, so I'm a remote worker. But Tom and I have something in common, is we're both born and raised in the lovely state of New Jersey. I've been doing staffing, recruiting, talent acquisition in the life sciences for probably in excess of 25 years in a variety of capacities, most recently in a corporate setting.
And what's awesome too about your background, just to jump in, is that you have experience with large companies, with small startup companies. You've been doing this a long time. So you have a really good understanding of how companies develop their compensation programs, how they develop offers, what the formula is, and how it works, not just with the big boys, but with small companies too, correct?
For the most part, yeah, I like to think so.
Yeah. Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to try to give people some clarity on what they should expect or what they need to know when they're in the interview process and they're about to negotiate an offer, because I just really think people don't fully understand. I think one of the biggest problems is that people get advice, sometimes bad advice, from other people. So let's start with dispel the myth. Do I always negotiate? Do I always negotiate an offer? Someone told me that never accept the first offer that's given to you. True or false?
Well, I mean, if it's a great offer, take it. That's my advice.
Yeah.
But do or should you negotiate? I think that's up to the individual, quite honestly. I mean, most cases these days, as you probably have seen, Tom, is that people are going to negotiate, whether it's through you or directly through somebody like myself. And then there are a number of factors that come into play, as it relates to, kind of if there's room or if there's not room. On my end, during this process, or at least certainly on the front end, when you're doing all the screening, interviewing, et cetera, you'd like to have an idea as to what expectations are. And then you kind of marry those in against sort of what a company can do. Right. At the smaller companies, you tend to have a little bit more latitude because there's not a lot of infrastructure in place. Whereas at some of the larger companies, there may or there may not be, so much room. So it all really depends on, the situation, and if they're an outlier candidate in a particular therapeutic area or something to that effect, those certainly are going to, come into play.
And I get it. Everybody wants to get the best deal possible. It's like,
sure,
it's like buying a house, right? If you're selling a house, you always want to get more. If you're buying a house, you always want to, that you're getting a deal. It's the same thing when you get a job offer.
Yeah, and I think too, there's other things to consider, right? What's it about for the candidate? Is it about the money? Is it about the title? Or is it about, opportunity, organization, and then consequently the people that you're going to work with and for, and how they can, inherently continue to grow and develop your professional skill set. I like to think that if those boxes can be checked, and if the delta is really not that significant between what they're really looking for and what's been presented, whether it's base, bonus, and other the long-term incentives piece, I like to think it can work. That's just an
Yeah,
opinion.
for sure. Yeah. So let's go back to, let's say we're in the interview process, candidates getting close to getting an offer. What information from an HR standpoint, from your point of view, are you looking to gather from them in order to put together an offer? What do they need to be prepared to provide?
Well, I like to at least have an idea as to what they're expecting.
Mhm.
In some cases, somebody will tell me exactly what they're earning, right? And in some cases, they like to just kind of provide a range. If I could be somewhere between X and Y, I think that would be ideal. Then when you have that information, then you are able to go back and kind of look at what is available,
Mhm.
for that individual and that particular role within the organization. At some of the larger companies, it's pretty well defined. You got your minimum, midpoint, and maximums, and then you've got your equity that you have to, kind of layer in, to all of this.
Mhm.
At some of the smaller companies where there isn't a lot of infrastructure in place, you kind of have to figure out really what that kind of looks like based on data that you're going to derive from various tools or resources that you look to utilize there.
Right. So first and foremost, be transparent. Give either the internal recruiter, HR person such as yourself, or external recruiter such as me, as much detail as possible in what you're looking for, what you might be walking away from. So if it's bonus time or coming close to bonus
Exactly.
time, is there something that you're walking away from? If there's a long-term incentive that's going to, for example,
Hit.
mature, right? You
Yeah.
have stock that's going to mature in the next 3 months. So if you stay just for 3 more months, you get $50,000. You leave, you lose the $50,000.
Yeah, and then you can kind of play with the start date, as it relates to those things. I think any information that you have, in particular as at-risk monies, certainly is going to come, into play. But I think what happens, the less that the harder it becomes,
Right.
right? Because so somebody who's in my position, they're going to have to get some levels of approval,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's got to go up the chain, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where I am now, I've got to go to the CEO. In some cases, it may not necessarily go that high, right? So if you're kind of guessing, speculating as to what the offer can be based on just data or internal equity, and then you say, okay, you get something approved, then you go back to the candidate and they say, well, that's really nice, but I was really hoping, for this. And then you kind of create questions,
Mm-hmm.
right? So one, there's extra work. Yeah, I don't think that's really that much of a big deal for, say, somebody like me. But then, then the hiring manager might start to have some questions, about the individual. Then maybe, their line supervisor or executive director or VP may start to have some questions.
Yeah.
You know, is this really the kind of person, that we want to have, here? I mean, we're a 100% transparent culture, but we have that opportunity to do so because of where we are, and that's sort of where we're founded on. Whereas you get to the Pfizers and the Mercks of the world, it might be perceived a little bit differently, but I think there's a lot of common themes that are going to arise when you kind of have to go through that whole thing again.
Well, let's go back a second to something you said. Is this the person ultimately, as we see what's coming out, the way this person is handling themselves, handling
Right.
this negotiation, is this someone we want to hire? Have you seen candidates in this situation kind of talk themselves out of the job offer and over negotiate?
It happens. It's pretty rare. Quite honestly, I think you sort of start to catch that on the front end. If you're doing the job right, as you know, when you're assessing and evaluating candidates, just like I do on a pretty regular basis, you start to get a sense and feel,
Hmm. Hmm.
for these things, and then you start to pick up, certain signals. Then I think that's a time where you might start to take away or walk away, you
Yeah.
know, from somebody. Whereas when it's kind of at the end game, then it might be a little bit different.
Mm.
'Cause they've already kind of passed the test,
Yep.
a little bit. However, that there's still a flag that can be raised, because they might be like, okay, well, if they're going to be like this now, when it's kind of a situation where, I don't want to say it's kind of a pressurized situation, but it's a
Yeah.
situation where, they're really going to have to make some decisions, or they're really going to have to, be a leader. Then I think, those are kind of the things that, might potentially pop up.
Yeah. And it does. You're right. It's rare. I've seen it happen. And I saw it happen once with a really solid guy who was a great candidate, but he was getting bad advice from somebody.
Yep.
He really pushed it and did it outside of, I mean, it was, we would have a conversation and he would go back and do the opposite. And so I was blindsided. The company was blindsided. Whoever was, we later found out it was like his wife or something, but, and the company got really upset and they said, you know what? We don't want to do business with this guy. We don't want
Yeah,
him
and
representing our
from my
company.
end, yeah, and from my end, what I do is I completely open, and honest with folks, right?
Yeah.
And I try to walk them through, kind of where it's come from,
Yep.
right? The offer is X. Okay, how did we get there, right?
Yeah.
I'll be talking to somebody, later today, and I just had a conversation with them the other day. You're our candidate of choice. This is what we're going to do.
Yep.
You're going to be the first person at this company that we've ever hired, right? So no equity here, but there is a peer group at that particular level. So I will be looking at that. Now I'm going to also be looking at data, and this is data from a preeminent resource, and it's going to be life sciences data in South San Francisco, in this particular job family.
Right.
Now, and I'm going to see what comes up as it
Yep.
relates to what you're ideally looking for,
Right.
right? And if I see something that's a little bit off, I'm going to give you a call and I'm going to say, hey, you gave me a range. Where's your flexibility here?
Yep.
One way or another, maybe we could supplement it somehow.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on that? Knowing that those boxes that I mentioned previously have already been checked,
All right.
and
So
yeah, you're right. And similarly, let's
yeah.
say if I'm at, large company ABC, right? And those aforementioned ranges, right? What you're going to have to be worried about with those kinds of people, if you will, not trying to categorize folks, but if they start to push that top end, right? Let's say it's $250,000, right?
Mhm.
And the top end is 255, right? But we're willing to do it, right? We're willing to do it. But what's going to happen is that when the merit increase comes, right? Let's say they get a 3.5% increase on 250K. Where does that put them? That
Mhm.
likely will put them over the 255K max range. So that may not, they put themselves in a unique position where a merit increase doesn't come to them.
Mm.
So they may outprice themselves from further administrative development, as well. So you kind of have to be careful. And I've explained that to people. Say, hey, here's the deal. We can potentially give it to you, but you're not going to get a raise for 2 years. How do you feel about that?
So they're going to be locked in. They're not getting any kind of increase because it'll put them
Right. I
over
mean, they
where they're getting.
may be able to make up for it somehow with some $5 under the table here and there. It's not
Right.
really true,
Right.
but they have to be very careful, of that. If you're looking at an MSL, as an example, some folks like to be MSLs. I'm an MSL. I'm a senior MSL. Sometimes they go into regional roles or this or that, but some people just like to kind of be there.
Yeah.
And if you push that limit, then they're there. They're locked in. Now, if they want to advance, maybe that there might be some room, but if the next level up also starts to move them, in a different direction, it could be at the top end of an MSL,
Hmm.
but that number could also put them at a higher level then maybe they might be looking to move into
Hmm.
as a next step, should they advance. So if you've got somebody who's on the inside who kind of has an understanding of all of that, and you're willing to explain it to them, and hopefully, that can at least, I don't want to say talk them off the ledge, but kind of make them say, okay, maybe I am overextending myself. Maybe I am too full of myself, or maybe I am, a little bit of this. And this guy's really, trying to help me out here.
Well, as I'm listening to you, you're a very patient guy. And as an HR guy, you're explaining to people. A lot of times people don't get that kind of guidance.
Yeah,
And
true.
so they're kind of going on the
That's a different
guesswork.
conversation.
Yeah. So I'd love to hear a little bit more. You had mentioned that you look at ranges. So let's go back to that point where you get their compensation expectations and
Mhm.
you're putting together an offer. Is there a formula, and what would that formula look like? And then you mentioned data. What data are you looking at?
So the larger companies that I've been with, I mean, they're very well established, right? So they have all of those things, already, well in place. At the smaller companies, we're kind of trying to get there,
Mhm.
a little bit, and it's kind of hard, to, embed those into an organization, kind of out of the gate. You probably have to wait until they're starting to get to 250, maybe 350 employees
Mhm.
or more, because they have infrastructure. They actually have all the functional areas, in place. I mean, we don't have medical affairs, right? So we have to kind of manage, that, a little bit. But a lot of companies are founded on, data in general. So they're going to be providing data, getting data, if you will, from a number of resources. It could be a Radford, Towers Parent, or what have you. And then they're going to get their ranges across all the various job families, right? And then the next thing you have to do is really determine what your philosophy is, because there's percentiles, that are in there. 50th percentile. Okay, maybe we want to sit there, right?
Mhm.
Holistically, across the organization. Okay, and then that's when you start to, embed, your ranges, in there. Maybe the 25th is your low end, maybe the 75th, is your high end, but your 50th is your sweet spot, right?
Mhm.
And then you kind of go from there. Where's the population, of a particular job family in the organization kind of sit within that range, et cetera, that I had mentioned.
Guy.
Region plays a role,
Mhm.
in that, because San Francisco Bay Area is going to be a lot different than the Research Triangle Park area. Then it's going to be different than, the Greater Boston, Cambridge area.
Yeah.
Whereas, some companies might just say, hey, our philosophy is 75th percentile,
Right.
right? Then if they're in a particular region, let's call it the New York, New Jersey metro area, right? Back in the day, where there was a ton, not that there's not now, but you might have one company down the street from another company that has varying, philosophies when it comes to comp.
Mhm.
And when somebody's looking to make a change, they might be here, whereas the other company's here. So that's why when I said, hey, they might just take it right away. They might be at a 50th percentile philosophy company going to a 75th percentile company, and they'll be like, whoa, that's sweet.
Mm.
I'll just jump at that, whereas it could be the other way around.
Got you. So you have this. Every company has their internal system, formulas, their ranges, their
Yep.
percentiles, their data sources that they're working on. We also hear this term internal equity.
Yeah,
Can you talk about that and explain to people what that means and how that plays a factor in this?
sure. So I'm going to use Bristol Myers. I apologize if I'm not allowed to do that, but that's when
Nah,
you and I
you're
worked
fine.
closely together. And they had I think at the time, might have had the largest MSL group, in the industry. They were they
For
were they
sure.
were pretty big.
Yeah.
And then you have, the various therapeutic areas. So if you have a population of 200 people that are in the field as MSLs, you've got equity right there. 200 people. Okay, what is the delta or the average of all of those 200 people
Hmm.
in a field medical science liaison role?
Hmm.
It's X, right?
Right.
But now we say, okay, well, virology is A, cardiovascular is B, oncology is C, and you can break it down, a little bit, That's where the equitable pool comes in. You can say, okay, I've got 20 people in oncology, field medical, that are earning A. And then your expectations are B. Where does that kind of fit in? Now, let me take a look at some of the data, if you will, and kind of see, how that layers in, to all of it. And and sometimes you don't always have the greatest access to it, right? The smaller, medium-sized company, I'm a lot closer, to it all. So you can kind of, you have that visibility. So you just kind of have to, work with it a little bit. Then you have a direct conversation with the hiring manager. If you have to go up, to the ED or the VP or whatever, you start, talking through it. And then if you're starting to notice trends, then you have to start to really have a conversation with folks in comp and say, hey, have we done any market, adjustments here? Do we see any compression concerns? And maybe we need to, kind of figure some things out.
Yeah, it's tricky. The internal equity piece gets tricky. And anytime you hear that term get thrown around,
and if you don't know the population of those folks that are internal, then it also can, play a factor. So, because as you know, in the field, you can have, an MSN versus an MD versus a PharmD versus a PhD versus an MPH, right? One might have X amount of years of experience, might want to have X amount of years of experience. And then how does that come into play with equity? So you try not to look at it too blindly. You got to try to really look into, really who those people are and where those inherent, factors, come into play. And I've seen it, in the data, in the past, when you don't really, you're not too sure really where the benchmarks are coming from. Right. So I could look at, and I was actually looking at it today. In medical affairs, you got MD, non-MD.
Right.
Then you've got clinical science liaison, but it doesn't categorize anybody as a non-MD or an MD, and it doesn't categorize them by therapeutic area.
Right.
So, but you have all your ranges in there by percentiles, 25th, 50th. So you have it all there, but what does it really mean?
Yep.
Right. So you have to kind of figure it out. I think what's helpful for folks like you and I is that we just happen to have been around a while.
Yeah.
So we kind of figure it out and not go about it, so mechanically, perhaps.
Well, and I think for job seekers, that's a good cue to now educate them. You have to ask questions. You have to ask questions of your recruiter, ask questions of your HR person when the time is right. You don't want to start asking questions about comp on your first interview. But when you're getting down to it and you've hopefully developed a good relationship with the internal HR person or with your recruiter, you want to get some guidance. Hey, listen, I just want to ask you for some guidance on this. Here's what I'm thinking. What are your thoughts? I don't, obviously I'm interested in the organization, show interest first. But it's got to be right. It's got to be right for me. It's got to be right for my family. It's got to be right for my situation. Doing that puts you
part too.
Yeah, just
but
put you in the right
element
place.
Also there too. So it's not always going to be about the administrative matters. You got to look at the human element.
Exactly. Exactly. So all things are coming together, and we're talking about the package and the offer, and of course, there's always the question about title, and that can really vary from organization to organization, especially in the MSL world, where there's really no standard. There's nothing that's been adopted, a governing body that said that, the standard for the medical affairs community is if you have more than 2 years of experience, you're senior. If you have 5+ year principal, there is nothing like that. All companies do it different. So let's talk about that. What's your feelings on comp and how should people approach it? Title, and how should people approach it?
Well, it's leveling. So in my experience in the MSL world, they're going to come in at a particular level. They're going to be titled as a medical science liaison or senior medical science liaison, if you will, right? But a company will level them, as either like, say, maybe it's a senior manager, maybe it's an associate director, or maybe it's a director. And then that's when the other pieces start to fall into place. So let's say they come in as an associate director, right? So most companies by plan, typically target bonus is somewhere in the neighborhood of 18%,
Mhm.
right? Director 20%, depends on the organization. And then if they're a publicly traded company, then they're going to be aligned with a certain amount of long-term incentives, whether it's a combination of RSUs and stock options, or just RSUs, right? And it's all going to be done per level. So when I've talked to candidates before, okay, it's a medical science liaison, senior medical science. What's the difference? It's experience in education, right? Hey, if you've got a PhD and you've got 10 years of experience and 8 of it's at Home Depot, sorry, dude, but you're not going to be a director, right? So we have to kind of play with all of that, to an extent, and so then that's where I think that's how we kind of place them, in a particular spot. So it's a pretty flat organization
Mhm.
in general, as you know,
Mhm.
in that niche MSL. So it's MSL, senior MSL, regional lead, director, therapeutic lead, close to an ED level, et cetera, unless they're looking to move, right?
Yeah.
Maybe I want to come in-house, maybe I want to do this or that. Then you've got a different whole set of circumstances that await them from an internal mobility career ladder perspective.
And would you say that in this leveling piece of it, would you say it's pretty scientific based upon just numbers and formulas, or is it negotiable? Can somebody negotiate it?
I mean, they could, but it's all going to be based on who they are, what they've done, and kind of where they are,
Mhm.
right?
Where
So
they fit.
if you've got a PharmD who's just finished a couple years of a fellowship and then maybe has worked in-house in medical communications for a year or so, it's going to be their first foray into working in the field, right? So
Mhm.
it's very different, then they have to look at time, right? How much time is it going to take them to just adjust, to say working from home, being on the road, traveling, all those kinds of things,
Mhm.
right? And then that's one part. And then the other part is how long is it going to take for them to actually be fully functioning, in that role? I think it's one thing to look at education, years of experience. I always ask the question of time,
Mhm.
right? So, okay, great. Everybody has to acclimate and or assimilate to a new organization, right? But how much time do you think it'll take for this person to start to be successful in this particular role? 1 month, 2 months, 3 months? That's a pretty good amount of time, in my view, where that they're going to fit at that particular level,
Right.
right? If you start to look at 4, 5, and 6 months, then I think you kind of have to kind of pull that back a little bit,
Mhm. Yep.
right? Unless they've got some kind of experience that, you're like, holy crap, I really got to have this person for whatever reason. I've been in cell therapy now for close to 6 years, and you get somebody with immuno-oncology who's got, ABC, then you might be like, well, maybe we might make an exception. However, the expectations aren't going to change,
Yep.
and they have to be fully aware of that.
My feeling is, and I tell people this all the time, I just try to educate people on to try not to get too stuck on a title,
Yeah,
because there's no level of I said it before, I'll say it again. There's no level of consistency. There's no standard in medical affairs. So each company's going to call it something different.
right.
And at the end of the day, you're going to look at the person's resume or CV and you're going to say, they have this many years of experience. And because of that experience and because of what they bring to the table, whether they're called senior or not senior, we consider them senior because they have 10 years of experience, 5 years of experience. But if you have 1 year of experience and somehow you were named and titled a senior MSL, that's great. Don't want to take anything away from you for that happening, but you might not be perceived as a senior MSL at another organization if
Right.
their formula is that you have to have more than 5 years of experience. So that's
Yeah, I mean, you try to kind of figure it out, right? When you're trying to, put things together, internally. So it's a little bit on away from the talent acquisition side, a little bit
Yep.
more towards the HR side. But most companies, I'd like to think, are going to have some element of a sort of a ladder in place when it comes to mobility. Now, what it does is it's based on a couple of things, right? It's education, and its years of experience, and its competencies. So those are the kind of what I was alluding to earlier in terms of time, is like, what are the inherent competencies of a particular role? And if they haven't exhibited those behaviors, previously, then what's the time factor that's going to enable them to get to those other behaviors, to have them be successful, kind of in the next role? That
Got
makes
you.
sense.
Yeah, totally. All right, so let's kind of fast forward now, and let's go to that part where, so you get an offer, and let's just say you get a written offer.
Okay.
Has everything in it. It's got the title, it's got the salary, it's got all the compensation, all that stuff, right? What is negotiable typically in that offer?
Well, let's hope that we've already gone through all of that before I've gotten the letter out there, because that's the way that I,
All right, well, let's say you don't get the letter before you get the letter.
Yeah, but if they come back, and say something at that point, then I might look at them a little bit differently.
All right, so before you get let me rephrase the question. You're in the negotiation phase.
Yeah. Huh?
What can people expect to negotiate?
Well, they're going to usually, if they're inclined to negotiate, they might want to negotiate any number of things, right? So there'll be three elements essentially. Let's take relocation and some of the other things, kind of out of the equation, here. So salary, of course, right? And let's say we've kind of gone through that. We've settled on something, right? Success. Bonus, no, not going to happen.
No way.
No, because that's in plan by level, and we've already determined, by comp, if you will, that the title, base, bonus established.
Got you.
Perhaps it's long-term incentives, right? Because some companies might have kind of a similar sort of window. Maybe there's a minimum, maybe there's a midpoint, and maybe there's a max. So and not, it's not something that's very overtly mentioned, right? But typically that will take another level, of approvals to be able to integrate that particular piece into an offer. So what you end up doing in these types of negotiations is prolonging everything.
Yeah.
Right. So now, in the first case, base comp, title, this and that, then you're trying to go back, and then you've got the business saying, what's wrong with this person? And you've got, what's wrong with you? And then you try to be the nice guy, walking on, tiptoe along the fence, right?
Yeah.
And, try to bring everybody together, because that's what you want to do. You want to be that synergistic, liaison, if you will, throughout all of this. No, he's really not. He's really a nice guy.
He's a nice guy.
A good company.
Yeah.
But try to be realistic, with all this stuff. I think at the end of the day, what the goal is, I like to think, is that I want to be fair, right? So fair and reasonable are two interesting words, right? So I want to be fair and reasonable to everybody.
Yeah.
Right. Company, team, etc., and the candidate, right?
Yep.
Now, the funny thing is, Tom, people don't always think I'm fair and reasonable, right?
Come on.
And that's when you start to look at some of those nuanced components of an offer and see what you can do. Now, some companies might say, hey, we're locked in here, we're locked in here, we're locked in here. Okay. Now, maybe there's something else that they could do to supplement it. Maybe it's a sign-on bonus, that comes into play. Now, some companies, may feel funny about that. Well, they're local. They've already had their bonus paid out. They don't have any long-term incentives, at risk. We've already vetted all of that. Why? Right.
Right.
Why would we be willing, to do that? Well, I think it might get them over the hill. Some companies are like, yeah, whatever, here's a check.
Yeah.
Whereas others, they might need a little bit more. Right.
So let's talk about that for a second, because we haven't gotten into the sign-on bonus piece. We'll get back to that other piece in
Sure.
what's negotiable, but you bring up sign-on bonus, which was on my list to talk about.
Okay.
In your experience, when are sign-on bonuses offered, and what should people know about them?
Well, it's justification first and foremost. So what's the justification behind giving somebody a sign-on bonus? Excuse me, the primary reason is typically at-risk money, right? We make an offer to somebody in December, we want them to start in January, they've got a bonus coming to them in February. That's at risk, we have to overcome that.
Yeah.
Right. Maybe the long-term incentive piece, as you mentioned, earlier. Hey, I've got a long-term incentive hit, in April, and it's significant. I leave now, I'm gonna walk away from it. Okay, what does that look like?
Right.
And then it's information, right? Information is impactful, in all of this. And some people, you go back and well, their stock's in the tank, that doesn't mean anything, or they're pre-commercial, the stock is valued at zero, or this or that. Or you might just say, hey, you know what? Start in April. Right.
Yeah.
Or in some cases, there could be a gap, right? So maybe we can't get you to A, right? So maybe we can get you sort of to A, with some additional monies that we might just provide to you up front. So everyone's got a perception of this too, right? I could be like, well, if you wanted 220, but we can only give you 205, here's a 15K sign on, that's 220, right? And whereas everybody, they might come back and say, well, minus taxes, it's really only this or that, and it's only for 1 year, and then you have to kind of go back and forth. Hopefully you're not dealing with those types too often, but sometimes companies can be creative around those things.
Well, it serves a purpose, and you hit the nail on the head. If there's a gap, if there's
and it just can't be overcome, or for whatever reason, it's just sorry.
Yep. Let's just try to see if a sign-on will make it better.
Yeah.
All right. So that leads me to, before we kind of wrap this up, you get the offer, and in the offer letter, there's a deadline, or not. Maybe there is no deadline. Maybe you got an offer and nobody's telling you when you have to give an answer back. What is the standard? How much time do people have to make a decision on an offer?
I always ask them, how much time do they need?
Okay.
Right. And in some cases, I've heard there are extremes, right? You send it to me today, I'll sign it. Like,
yeah,
I'm in, I'm thrilled. I can't wait to be a part of your organization. Others might be, interviewing, at other places, and then and as you're, talking to them, you might be like, well, how does this compare to that? What are your thoughts on this? And like, they're all pretty good, but I really like your company. And then you say, okay, well, what's the timing look like? Okay, so if I'm giving somebody an offer on a Monday and they're wrapping up their interviews on a Wednesday, I might be like, how does Friday, look for you?
Yeah.
And I just kind of work with the candidate, a little bit, on that. I've had people come back and say, hey, excuse me, I just need a little bit more time. And I say, why?
Yeah.
And depending upon the response will dictate, how I feel about that. And you've got to be careful because, hiring managers, blah, 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 but I want to just be conscious, of catering to the needs again, of everybody, again, walking that line. As long as you communicate something to me that I believe is true, and I trust you on all of that, then I can go back and say, hey, look, this is what the situation is. Maybe they could be on vacation. I mean, there's all kinds of things, that come in. I've let some people run by, their date to respond. And it's, it's a trusting, kind of thing. I don't look at it one way or the other. I think maybe it's just the fact that it's been around too long, but
what I'm hearing you say, and if I could summarize, what I'm hearing you say is, when it comes to the offer negotiation, be as transparent as possible, get the information in as early as possible, create a relationship, a strong relationship with your HR counterpart so that they trust you. And then that way, that level of trust and transparency is going to get you on the same page, and you'll be able to communicate what it is that you want in the time that you want it. You can negotiate without looking like you're overdoing it, or you're being too pushy, or you're not truly interested in the company or the job. And then that way, that person's going to be an advocate and maybe help you get through that finish line. Is all that accurate?
Yeah, I'd say for the most part, right? I mean, it's be yourself,
Yeah.
right? And if you're the kind of person that is a very forthcoming, open, honest individual, in general, why change your behavior? Why change your style really at any given time? Throughout the process. If you've got an offer over here and an offer over here, and then you're not too sure what to do, and that's why you might need more time, I'd be like, fine, okay, well, what are you thinking? Like, what are the differences? And I might be like, yeah, these guys offered me 5,000 more, but I really like you guys. Can you give me 5,000 more? I'll see what I could do. And there's another element of the negotiation. Or it might be like, hey, it's because of this. I'm just torn, right? And and not a lot of people, as you probably experienced, that are in my position get that close, right? I don't know if that makes me an outlier or not, but it's the way that I kind of operate, and just happens to work. Whereas others may be dealing directly, say, with somebody like you, and I know you're an upfront, honest guy, and you're not going to pull any punches here, which is good. Even the hiring managers that they're dealing directly with them are kind of the same way. Also. So I just say just continue to be yourself, and be who you are. And,
Awesome.
and I think those consistent behaviors will really bode well for somebody.
That's great advice, Chris. That is a great way to end it. So you've heard it here from the experienced, tenured guy that knows the inner working. So, hey, thank you for coming on, pal. You were awesome. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Tom. It's great to be here, and hopefully this provides some value and insight to the folks out there.
I'm sure it will. All right, man. Well, thanks for joining me, everybody. You guys have a great rest of your day, and come back. We'll see you soon. Thank you so much for listening to the show. If you've enjoyed it, please subscribe so that you don't miss episodes in the future, and feel free to leave a rating or a review or a comment. Thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.